J'aimerais faire cette présentation en français, mais rapidement, les francophones ici me demanderaient de la donner en anglais. So I'll stick to, sorry, I'm just going to leave this here. I'll stick to English if that's okay. Let me begin by saying that I'm delighted to be here, and I really mean that. And I'd like to talk to you today about where we at in terms of this blockchain revolution. And I'd like to pose the question, could Geneva, the global center for trust, become a global center for the trust protocol? This is the second era of the internet. First era was based in Silicon Valley. Where will the second era be based? So let me dig into that. Right now, there's a lot of cynicism, at least in North America, about this. The crash of the crypto market has caused many to conclude that it's not just that there wasn't just a cryptocurrency bubble, but that the underlying technology, blockchain, actually is not going to work out, or at least work out the way that everyone thought. I think that view is quite uninformed, and by the end of this, about 44 minutes from now, I hope that you'll agree with me. But, in 2000, the dot-coms crashed. I remember in 1999, I gave about 120 paid speeches, and the demand was unbelievable. One 20-minute speech, I charged $180,000. And after the dot-coms crash, nobody wanted to hear from me or about the internet. And a similar thing is kind of happening a little bit today. But from my point of view, the crypto tail has been wagging the blockchain dog for some time. And the crash of cryptocurrencies is like a fresh summer rain, kind of clearing the air, enabling us to focus on what's really important. That the real pony in this pile here is not currencies, and I'll explain that. It's this extraordinary blockchain technology. So this is what I'm going to cover today. Why this is part of the second era of the digital age and the second era of the internet. Say a few things about blockchain and financial services, blockchain in the enterprise, where we're at there, blockchain in government, what's happening there. And I'd like to address this question about Geneva that was posed at the beginning of the conversation. So let's get into it. What is blockchain? Well, some of you may remember in '94, I wrote the book, The Digital Economy. They say that was the first bestseller about the web and business. And 20 years later, I was asked to write the anniversary edition of the book. And I had to read my book from 20 years ago, which is always humbling. And the book held up pretty well, but it caused me to think about what's been happening over the last while and where are we going from here. And it occurred to me that really we've had a first era of the information age, if you like, the digital age. Mainframes, minis, PCs, the internet, the web, mobile, web, social media, the cloud, big data. And now we're moving into a period where technology infuses itself into everything, every business process, into the physical world with billions and trillions of inert objects that are communicating and even doing transactions, where we have technologies that learn, that they can do things that they weren't programmed to do, machine learning, artificial intelligence. And I concluded also that the foundation for all of these technologies was the underlying technology of cryptocurrency, blockchain. Now, to me, this is nothing less than the second era of the internet. So I'd like to try and explain that idea to you. For 40 years, and I've been writing about this stuff for that long, researching it and consulting. For 40 years, we've had the internet of information. That's what the internet's about, right? But if I send you some information, if I send you a copy of this deck, I'm actually not sending you the information. I'm sending a copy. Even with a website, email, I retain the original. That works great for information. But when it comes to the things that really matter in Geneva, and for that matter in the global economy, assets, things of value like money or other financial assets, securities, loyalty points, contracts, intellectual property, even cultural assets like art or music or votes. A vote is an asset, something of value that belongs to somebody. Carbon credits, the data in our identities. When it comes to assets, copying them is a terrible idea. You don't want someone copying your vote or your music or your identity. And if I send you 1,000 francs, it's really important that I don't still have the money, right? So cryptographers have called this the doublespend problem for a long time. And the way that we manage this problem in our economy is through middlemen, large intermediaries, not just banks, credit card companies, and financial institutions, but governments, social media companies now, big players that enable us to trust each other. They clear and settle transactions, they keep records, and overall they've done a pretty good job. But around 2008, we started to notice some problems. I don't know if you remember where you were in September the 16th in 2008. I was giving the closing speech to Sibos, which is the Global Congress of Bankers. And 2 days earlier, Lehman Brothers had crashed. And I looked out at the sea of deer in the headlights, and that's a very Canadian expression, sorry. You're driving along, there's a deer in the road, and it just kind of stares at you. Anyway, and I threw away my PowerPoint, which is a good thing because, you know, power corrupts, but PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. And I gave a critique of the financial system, but we didn't really have a lot of solutions back then. Well, something big happened also around the same time in 2008. An anonymous person or persons named Satoshi Nakamoto wrote a paper outlining a new form of digital cash called Bitcoin. And Satoshi solved the double spend problem. This is the biggest innovation in computer science in a generation, from my point of view. And people are confused by Bitcoin. You know, Bitcoin is a store of value, goes up and down. It's down right now, but if you bought it 2 years ago, you're way up. Bitcoin is a unit of exchange. It's a currency, and there's some rules for that. If you're in a country with restricted cash flows, you're in Venezuela or something. But the real opportunity is none of that. The real opportunity is this underlying blockchain technology. And the reason is, for the first time in human history, people can manage, transact, communicate assets peer-to-peer. And trust is not achieved necessarily by an intermediary. It's achieved by cryptography, collaboration, and some very clever code, which is why we call it the trust protocol. Trust is native to the medium. Just like the internet was a native digital medium for information, this is a native digital medium for assets that enables trust. So it doesn't mean intermediaries will go away, but it means that they have a big opportunity to reinvent themselves, to embrace this technology to create new value. We'll get into that in a second. Now, at this point, let me just ask you where you're at. So, category number 1, what's a blockchain? Category number 2, I know a little bit, but don't bring me on stage to explain it. Number 3, I know a lot. Number 4, this is my world. Okay. Number 1, what's a blockchain? Few. Okay. Number 2, I know a little bit. Don't tell me. All right. Number 3, I know a lot. Number 4, this is my world. Okay. Well, most of you are in category 2. So let me take a minute to explain this. Now, you know, Mark Twain, the American writer, he says, writes a letter to a friend. He says, "I'm sorry I wrote such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short letter." It's taken me 5 years to be able to explain this in 3 minutes, okay? So turn on your watch. Here we go. Now, there are many different types of blockchains, and they have many different consensus mechanisms, ways of establishing trust and validating transactions. But the one I'm going to explain to you right now is the first one, Bitcoin, because that's the one that got this whole party started. Okay, here we go. Turn on your stopwatch. That 1,000 francs that I sent you is broadcast out to a global network of millions of computers, each using the highest level of cryptography. And all around the world, there's a group of people with computers called miners. And these miners do a lot of work to validate that transaction. In the case of Bitcoin, the miners have computing power estimated to be 20 to 50 times bigger than all of Google in the world. And every 10 minutes, kind of like the heartbeat of a network, a block gets established. And that block contains all the transactions from the last 10 minutes. The fact that I sent you 1,000 francs. But ultimately, it could be anything. That a land title was registered, or 2 people got married, or someone bought and sold a security, or that a light bulb bought some power from a distributed power source, any transaction. And then the miners use their computing power to compete to validate that transaction and to own the block. And the winning miners paid some of the cryptocurrency from that blockchain. And then, this is the important part, that block gets connected to the previous block with a digital wax seal to create a chain of blocks. And if I wanted to hack that block and take that 1,000 francs and send it to everybody in this room, if I wanted to commit fraud, I'd have to hack that block plus the previous block, every block in the entire chain, not just on one computer using the highest level of cryptography, which is tough to do, but across millions of computers all simultaneously. This is going to be tough to do. Now, I came up with this really good analogy, I thought, on how to describe why that would be hard to hack. But late night television in the US, it's a great show called John Oliver has a show about this week, or last week tonight. And he did a whole show on national television about blockchain. And well, here's why I don't use the analogy anymore.
And because of the complicated process the network uses to verify records, it is very secure. Now, relax. I'm not going to get into what that process is or how it works, but I will share a really helpful, really dumb metaphor for why it is safe.
The way I like to think of it is that a blockchain is a highly processed thing, sort of like a chicken McNugget. And if you wanted to hack it, it'd be like turning a chicken McNugget back into a chicken. Now, someday someone will be able to do that, but for now, it's going to be tough.
Hold on. That is an absolutely horrible thought. So why is that reporter so happy about the idea? Because if anyone ever figures out how to turn a chicken McNugget back into a chicken, that chicken is going to be up. He's going to spend the rest of his life suffering from PTSD and writing haunting poetry about the experience. The things I saw, buck, buckaw. My body is whole, but what of my soul?
So that's why I still think it's a good analogy, though. But, so good luck hacking Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin was the first app, if you like, on the Internet of Value, just like email was the first app on the Internet of Information, right? But then we saw the rise of the World Wide Web in 94, 95, a general purpose platform for building any app, and that's what's occurring today. So we have Hyperledger from the Linux Foundation. IBM's a big player in that. Ethereum, invented by a 19-year-old Torontonian. It's worth tens of billions of dollars. It's the most successful startup in Canada. Most Canadian audiences I've ever spoken to have never heard of it. But it has some very strong capabilities, too. And one is a facility for making smart contracts, just like what it sounds like, a contract that self-executes. 180 banks have got together to create a platform called Corda from something called R3 to try and create a new payment and transactional system for financial services. Ripple says it can do transactions at the level of Visa. And central to all of this is the notion of smart contracts. A smart contract is an understanding between people that's in code, and it has a software lawyer and a government and a bank inside the contract, and it self-executes. And a really simple example of one would be a vending machine. You put some money into it, a chocolate bar falls out. Because you put the right amount of money in, the contract is executed, you get paid, you receive your chocolate bar. So that can be applied to all kinds of areas where we need agreements. So, notwithstanding some recent cynicism, the hype engine is definitely still cranking away to the point that Dilbert is now involved in talking about blockchain. So I wrote a couple of books in the 1980s that nobody read. My mother bought most of them, I think. But I finally did write my first bestsellers in the early 90s. And I got lucky with this book in terms of the timing. And I also got lucky in terms of my co-author. It was my son, Alex. It turns out, well, he's smarter than I am, and he's a better writer. So this did become the big book on blockchain. If you're wondering how to get it, the very best way is to get it in massive volume, okay? Large numbers. Christmas. It's coming sooner than you think, if you have friends, right? No, seriously, and there's a new edition of the book. If you look in the upper right there in Europe, it's that yellow covered book. I mean, there are 25,000 new words in there talking about crypto assets and all kinds of stuff. So this is the second era of the internet, and it's the second era of the digital age. What does this mean for financial services? I'll tell you a story. When writing the book, I said, you know, Alex, this financial industry is so confusing to me. It's like a Rube Goldberg machine. You know that guy, Rube Goldberg? He created all these super complicated machines that would do something really simple, like open a door, crack an egg, with bowling pins falling over and balls rolling along and so on. Well, that's kind of like the financial industry to me. I mean, you tap your card at a I don't know, a cafe out here, and a bunch of messages go through half a dozen counterparties, each with their own technology and systems and delay and cost and counterparty risk. That's what almost got us in 2008. And then 2 or 3 days later, a clearing and settlement occurs. Well, imagine if all of that were based on a distributed ledger, on a blockchain. There would be no 3-day settlement because the payment and the settlement would be the same activity, right? We could have a payment system that's real time and that's smart. You could have smart money and smart payments inside a smart contract. You know what I'm talking about? Michael Casey, one of our colleagues, gives a good example. He says, you send your kid to university, you give him some money, and you hope he's going to spend it on books and tuition. Well, if he had smart money, and he walks into the bar and orders a caipirinha or something, the money's going to say, sorry, Bill, I don't do caipirinhas. I only do books and tuition. So the same kind of thing could happen in terms of the whole payment system. We could have a single version of the truth. We could have all kinds of benefits that would improve the economy radically. What country is going to be the first one to move to blockchain for its payment system? Anyway, to complete the story, Alex comes back to me and he says, I think the financial industry does 8 things. It authenticates and attests to value. You are who you are. That's a franc. That's a stock in a company. It transfers value. It moves stuff around. Because it transfers value, it gets to store value. And because it stores value, it gets to lend value. It exchanges value. Payment systems, stock exchanges, all kinds of marketplaces. It funds and invests value. Angel investing, venture capital, investment banking, mutual funds, hedge funds, private equity, and so on. It insures value and manages risks, the insurance industry, reinsurance, etc. and it accounts for and audits value, the big accounting companies and others. Every one of these, in theory, can be eliminated by this blockchain distributed ledger technology. Now, that's not going to happen for the reasons you heard earlier, that the smart banks are working hard, spending a lot of money trying to understand how to re-intermediate to create new value in the middle rather than being disintermediated. Now, if we were talking only about this issue, I'd go around this circle. It's all in the book, explaining what's going on with each of these, but I'll just pick up one example. In the book, we said crowdfunding on a blockchain, didn't even have a name then, is going to be a big deal. And the year the book came out, these things called ICOs got named, and $165 million was raised. The next year, it was close to $3 billion, and last year, depending on who's counting, it was up to $10 billion. So we said venture capital will be unrecognizable in 5 to 10 years. We were wrong. Venture capital is already unrecognizable today. So, you know, technology, that old expression, technology, we overestimated in the short term and underestimated in the long term. Well, in this case, we underestimated it in the short term. So there's a lot of confusion about this, though, and the term ICO is actually a bad term, because what's being offered is a token, but typically it's not a coin, it's not a currency. Yes, there are cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin being the mother of them all, and the amazing thing about Bitcoin is that it works. But there are other things. There are platforms like Ethereum, or like Aeon, or Cosmos, or Polkadot. These are new environments where you can build capability on them. And the token's not a currency. The token has another function. It performs some utility, or it's a way of achieving consensus. Then you have actual utility tokens. Golem is doing pretty well. It's trying to compete with Amazon, creating a cloud where they want you to put up your computer on the network overnight. Now, they need a way of incenting you to do that, and that's the role of the token there. Then there are security tokens. I believe that all financial assets and all types of securities will become tokenized, which is why it's wrong to say blockchain good, crypto bad. That's wrong too, because often there's a role for these tokens and crypto assets in all kinds of fundamental transactions in the economy. Stock markets will be unrecognizable in 10 to 15 years, and you talk to the heads of smart stock markets like NASDAQ, and they'll tell you that. There are natural asset tokens. You can tokenize a barrel of oil or a tree, or a synthetic asset like a carbon credit. Crypto collectibles. We collect all kinds of things. These are being tokenized. Crypto kitties being the one that's kind of crazy. Billions of dollars worth of digital kitties online. You could never create a little pretty kitty before because of the doublespend problem. Someone could replicate it. Well, now you can create a kitty that nobody recognizes. Personally, I think these are people with either too much time on their hands or they have a great love of cats that's a little unhealthy. But anyway, then we have another huge one, which is crypto fiat currencies. At Davos a couple of years ago, I held a session with the heads of all the central banks and all the ministers of finance, and we talked about fiat currencies becoming cryptocurrencies, and there are some big advantages to that occurring. Banks could have better transparency, central banks, better transparency and knowledge. In a crisis, rather than giving money to the traditional banks and hoping they do something with it, you could helicopter drop it onto the mobile devices of the population or certain parts of the population. You could have a lighter touch on transparency. So the real smart central bankers are struggling with this, trying to figure out how to make it happen. This year, a major country will adopt blockchain for its fiat currency. Trade finance, no brainer. You've got trains and boats and planes and escrow agents and transfer people and borders and tax authorities. And dozens and dozens of players, rather than all that moving along serially, a lot of it with paper and faxes and emails, you create a shared network state. So One Belt, One Road, the biggest supply chain in the world, linking Hong Kong and Rotterdam, the trade finance on that is being done on blockchain. It's just not true that this stuff isn't being used for major applications. I was in Liechtenstein recently, and here's a small little jurisdiction that wants to be one of the world's leaders on blockchain with big support from the Liechtenstein family, but also the local government and great entrepreneurs like LCX, which is a terrific exchange based in Liechtenstein. And this is for professional investors to be able to make investments in this space. But as was pointed out at the beginning, this is not just for the financial industry, it's affecting every industry. At the Blockchain Research Institute, we're studying 13 different industries and how this technology changes them. And I'm going to give you a real quick little 1-minute economics tutorial here. Who's heard of Ronald Coase? Okay. This economist, 85 years ago, wrote a paper where he posed a deceptively simple question. He said, why does the firm exist? Why do we have corporations? And he says, if Adam Smith is right, and the open market's the best mechanism for allocating goods and resources and materials, why isn't everybody an independent contractor at every step along the way in production? Why do we have firms? And he said, the answer is, and he won a Nobel Prize for saying this, the answer is transaction costs. He said the costs of things like search and coordination and contracting and establishing trust in an open market are way greater than the cost of doing things inside the boundaries of a firm. So a firm will expand to the point where transaction costs are no longer lower inside the boundaries of the firm. So throughout the 20th century, we had industrial age corporations that were vertically integrated. They did everything from soup to nuts. Then the early days of IT came along and the boundaries of corporations got more porous. 92, in a book called Paradigm Shift, I described it as the extended enterprise. Then we're seeing the rise with the internet of business webs, where companies would focus on what they do best and partner to do the rest. And now blockchain is beginning to devastate these transaction costs. Search, the cost of, say, finding money. You used to have to do that through a VC, an investment banker. Well, now you can hold a token event to raise the funds. The cost of coordination, getting people to work together. The cost of contracting, you can use smart contracts and so on. So value creation is going to become more decentralized. Now, it doesn't mean that some countries won't be vertically integrated, but the general trend is towards a more decentralized and distributed world. Now, I'll just give you a case in point about this. We talked about different types of firms emerging in terms of complexity on the one hand and automation on the other. And we said, in the upper right-hand corner, you could have something, we'll call it a decentralized autonomous enterprise, that has no management and no people. It's a bunch of smart contracts, distributed applications, some autonomous agents on a blockchain. And it could go raise money with a crowdfunding campaign, go about its business. We almost didn't publish this because we thought, this is just too futuristic. People are not going to relate to this, but we decided to publish it. A week after the book came out, an organization was launched called the Decentralized Autonomous Organization, and it had no management and no people. It was a bunch of smart contracts and some agents on a blockchain. It was a venture capital company, and its first goal was to raise some money. So this thing made a software, went out and raised $164 million. Order of magnitude bigger than the previous crowdfunding campaign. And it said about its business. Now, those of you who know the story, it's not a happy ending. because there was a coding error in the smart contract facility, and a hacker got in there, and he had the ability, over a 30-day period, if he was allowed to do this, to actually get money out of there. So the creators of this thing decided to shut it down and return the money. But the fact that something like this could exist, a company with no people, you know, Bob Dylan, remember? There's something going on here and you don't know what it is. What we're moving into the early days of a profound change to the firm, to the deep structure and architecture of the corporation, and of how we orchestrate capability in society to innovate, to create goods and services, and so on. So that was the DAO, if you hear about that. So let me spend 1 minute each on 7 new business models. We're studying 100 in the Blockchain Research Institute, but these are 7 that give you a feeling for where this is going. Number 1, we could create a real sharing economy. I love it when people describe Uber and Airbnb as sharing economy companies. I mean, it's not a really good term. The reason that they're successful is precisely because they don't share. They're service aggregators. They aggregate these services together and they sell them. Well, you could create Uber as a bunch of distributed applications on a blockchain. Because everything that Uber does, search, database, contracting, payments, reputation, all of that stuff lends itself beautifully to blockchain. Same for Airbnb. You show up in Geneva, you're looking for a good place, you go to blockchain Airbnb, coming soon, and it's a database. You find a great place, 5-star, you book it, initiates a smart contract. You turn the key, initiates a partial payment to the owner. You go inside, use an espresso machine, you watch a movie, smart contract picks that stuff up. You leave after 3 days, you turn the key, the full payment is initiated. You enter a 5-star rating because it's a database, right, on the blockchain. There's no company involved. Oh, by the way, nobody can hack that rating or mess with it unless they know how to turn a chicken McNugget into a chicken. Oh, sorry, I have to restrain myself. So that's really, even the big disruptors could be disrupted by this technology. The internet broke our intellectual property regime because we didn't have a native medium for assets, so all we could do was publish things. So we took assets like art and music and writing and articles and so on, and we reproduced them. Well, if you were a songwriter, 35 years ago, you write a platinum song, you get $46,000 in revenues as the composer. Today, you get $35. So that's not going to buy you much in Geneva, I'll tell you that. So it might get you a couple of Starbucks. So what are we going to do about this? Because this hurts music lovers, it hurts the creators of music, and it's not good for society. Well, Imogen Heap, the British singer-songwriter, created a blockchain music platform where she posts a song on that. The song is inside a smart contract. And the song defends her intellectual property rights. You want to listen to it, maybe it's a few cents. You want to put it in your movie, and the song says to the movie producer, what do you want to do? Make it a background, somebody's going to sing it, it's going to be a theme song, a ringtone. And the way she describes it is, my song acts as a business. It's out there defending my rights, collecting money on my behalf. What a powerful concept. Disintermediation, of course, is a big factor here, but you can re-intermediate. You can create new value in the middle. Annalie Domingo, housekeeper in Toronto for 22 years. She gets on the bus, goes to the bank, cashes her check, gets back on the subway, the bus, goes to the Western Union office in the Filipino mall that specializes in the Filipino diaspora. People have left their ancestral lands, they send money back home. It's called remittances. It's upwards of $1 trillion a year. She gets charged, on the average, we figure about 11, 12%. It takes 4 to 7 days for the money to arrive. Well, 2 years ago, Annalie Domingo took, oops, I don't have a picture of it. Anyway, she took a From her mobile, she sent money on a blockchain directly to her mom's mobile. The money arrives not in 47 days, but a second later, and then there are a bunch of cars driving around on a map. Looks like an Uber interface. They're tellers. She sees a 5-star teller. He's 7 minutes away. Clicks on that. The guy shows up at her place, knocks on the door, gives her Filipino pesos, and she gets charged 1.5%. So Western Union's in the middle here. They're going to be disintermediated unless they reinvent themselves. And a company like Paycase is the re-intermediator. How could you create new value in the middle? I've said for like almost 30 years now that there's more opportunity in the middle typically than there is of the old displaced middle. The problem is that the leaders of the old middle are not typically the one to create the new middle. I mean, digital economy, I said, I think bookstores are in the middle. They're going to go away. They're between publishers and readers. But there are opportunities to create something even bigger in the middle. Now, Amazon hadn't been invented yet, but you can re-intermediate if you want to. Supply chain is a huge app, and this is happening for sure. It began with Walmart and food safety, but food safety and the provenance of food is a really big one. Do you know that it depends where you are, but up to a third of fish that you buy in a supermarket or is served to you in a restaurant is not what it is. It's cheap fish being labeled as expensive fish, or it's endangered fish being labeled as something that's illegal. Well, now there's a great program to put the provenance of fish onto blockchain. That's using Hyperledger. IBM and Walmart work together around food safety. They started with avocados, and now Walmart has told all of its suppliers you need to be on our blockchain platform within 2 years. So it's just not true that that's not happening. 5, the physical world is becoming smart and interconnected. And when that light bulb does buy some power from a distributed power source, it's not going to go through the Visa network. It's going to be microtransactions. The reputation of the light bulb will be enhanced as a trustworthy device, and there'll be a machine currency that's secure. And all of this Internet of Things, trillions of devices ultimately, they're not just communicating, they're going to be doing transactions. And the Internet of Things will need a ledger of things. Platform builders, I mentioned a bunch of them. Even in terms of crypto assets and investing in these assets, consider this fact. The Internet of Information is in the commons, thanks to Vint Cerf and Tim Berners-Lee and others like that. The actual protocols are not owned by anyone. But for blockchain, a lot of these new platforms, the protocols themselves will be owned by investors. So how much is the Internet of Information worth? I don't know, $1 trillion, $10 trillion? If it's true what I'm saying, that the Internet of value is even of greater value, then this may be a very significant investment opportunity. So let's not get too carried away here, saying that all this crypto thing was just like the tulips of Holland. They weren't. I mean, there's still a role for tulips. But we're talking about owning the new platform, the new operating system for the economy. Now, I'm not suggesting you go out and buy into one of these new platforms, but there's significant opportunities. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to slip ahead. Finally, what happens to big data in this environment? I think it gets turned on its head, and there's a simple reason for that. Do you remember all around the world, prior to capitalism, we had feudalism, and the landowners allowed you to, or tied you to some land, and you worked the land, you grew all this stuff, but the landlord would expropriate most of it. Well, data is the new asset of the digital age, new asset class. And all of you create this data, the virtual you. And the virtual you may know more about you than you do, because you can't remember what you bought a year ago or said a year ago, or your heart rate a year ago, your exact location, or what you got on that test. The trouble is that the virtual you is not owned by you. It's created by you, but it's expropriated. You're left with a couple of cabbages. And this is a big problem because it means you can't use that data to plan your life. You can't monetize the data, and there's a small handful of companies that own this data asset, or governments that use it, sometimes not very for very positive purposes. And it also means that your privacy is being undermined. And people say to me, "Oh, come on, Don, privacy's dead, get over it." I think that's a foolish perspective. Privacy is the foundation of freedom. And our identities that consist of all this data have been taken away from us. We need to get them back. And we can do that now with a blockchain. Well, Europe says we need the General Data Protection Regulation. There may be a role for that, but the way that we're going to solve this problem is not through governments. The way we're going to solve this problem is by each of us owning our own identity, a dynamic, self-sovereign identity on a blockchain that we own. And it's got our medical data and our health and our educational data and our government data, and it sweeps up all this transactional data as we're moving along, and we can use this data to plan our lives, and we can monetize it as well. So what does this mean for Facebook? Well, I think it's an existential issue for these companies. They need to figure out a way to live in a world where we get to have our own data. And again, re-intermediation opportunities. There'll be a new generation of data aggregators that will negotiate with each of us. Okay, Don, if you're found unconscious in an accident, will you give away your health record to any certified medical professional? I'm probably going to check yes to that one. But maybe, Don, do you want to anonymize this data and sell it? Would you like to give this data to scientific research and so on? So those are 7 of many, many business models that I think are starting to shake the windows and rattle the doors of the economy. Okay, to finish off here, in the digital economy, I wrote a whole chapter on the reinvention of government. I said this internet can transform the operations of government and the nature of democracy. Is there anyone here who thinks the internet has transformed government for the better? I mean, we took the internet and we paved the cowpath. We automated existing government bureaucracies. Sure, there were some improvements, but now we've got a native digital medium for assets and value, which is what governments are all about. And so big play is underway all around the world. Dubai says it wants to be the first fully blockchain government, and many other activities underway. This guy, Thomas Elds, the erstwhile president of Estonia, 5 years ago, I interviewed him, and he talked about blockchain. A president of a country talked about blockchain and how that could be used to build a citizen identity. And then quasi-government or civil society things. This is one full disclosure. I'm involved in creating this. It's tokenizing carbon credits. And so you'll buy that carbon neutral cappuccino or espresso machine because it comes with these Carbon X tokens. They're sort of like loyalty points, only they're fungible. You can trade them and turn them into francs if you want. And we're now working to make entire funds, like a mutual fund, carbon neutral. We could now finally use this technology to make some big changes in democracy. And this fits right in with the Swiss model pretty nicely. So let me explain. I think it's fair to say we do have a crisis of legitimacy of our democratic institutions. Young people typically are not voting. Many believe in the bumper sticker, don't vote, it only encourages them. It's kind of funny, except it's not, because democracy is the best system that I'm aware of. But in the United States, a lot of people are questioning not just who's in power, but the actual democratic process. Well, what are the alternatives? Should we have like a benevolent dictator, or should we have jihadist governments or religious governments? Or maybe we should move towards anarcho-syndicalism. This is a big, big problem. And at the heart of it is that in many countries, politicians don't act in the interests of their constituents. They act according to how their funders want them to. So in the United States, 96% of Americans think there ought to be a background check for firearms purchase. But Congress can't pass a law reflecting the will of 96% of the population. And you know why. So this government for the people, by the people, of the people, this is risible. We need to fix democracy. And legitimacy is the idea that you may disagree with who's in power, but at least you think the system is the best one. Could we move to a second era of democracy? The first era was good, was better than having kings and nobles run things. But we created these representative institutions, but there was a weak public mandate, citizens were inert, and politicians were beholden to big money. Could we create a second wave where we have transparency, where we have accountability, and where we have a culture of public deliberation? Lots of ways to do this. I don't really have time to go through these, but we can e-vote now in a much more secure way. A lot of people are still uneasy about e-voting because they're not sure the double spend problem's been solved. They wouldn't articulate it that way, but with blockchain, you can have cryptographic proof that your vote was cast for the person for whom you were voting, and it's not double spent, or it's not moved to somebody else. We could have greater transparency, and corruption is a huge problem all around the world. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. You make politicians naked, they got to get buff. They got to get fit. We could have, if you can have smart money, you could have a smart vote. You vote as part of a smart contract. Wow, maybe Switzerland could lead in doing that, led with e-voting. How about with smart voting? And there are all kinds of new platforms for citizen engagement. The final one is we can reinvent our central banks. The franc should be a cryptocurrency, just like the euro and the dollar and so on. And this would give central bankers very powerful tools managing the money supply. It could be more transparency. You could have a lighter touch on regulation because you use transparency to clean up things. Many, many big opportunities. So there's a lot going on, actually, in government. It's early stage still, but you can see that the implications are kind of huge. So let me close with this thought. What about Geneva? If the first era of the internet were based in Silicon Valley, where's the second era going to be based? Well, clearly it's not going to be in one place. It's going to be distributed. But any region or country that can find leadership is going to benefit a lot. They're going to be able to transform their institutions. And in Geneva, you got some kind of important ones, not just banks, but these global institutions that help us function together in the world. Whoever finds leadership is going to build a powerful ecosystem, and that means jobs, high-paying jobs. It means lots of tax revenue. It means stability and so on. And there are a lot of other benefits. Reinventing governments, because one of the best things governments can do is to use the technology themselves, to become a model user. So I thought the discussion of the criteria at the beginning was very good, but these are some of the things that we look at. Does government actually support this whole revolution? It's good to have a big domestic market. China's got some advantages there. You want regulatory clarity and openness, and it is a tough time to be a regulator, for sure. You want to build a big ecosystem. It's really important that the banks buy into this. Because this is not just about financial services, but it starts with the banks. You need to build a center for thought leadership. You need to get good funding for entrepreneurship. And it's really important to build up strong communities of talent. So we actually, and then of course you want big corporations, big institutions to be using this technology to transform themselves. So we're actually tracking different places in the world right now. And during the World Cup, we held this funny thing called the Blockchain World Cup, and it was a runoff. It started with a group of 8, and then 4, and then 2, and then so on. And Zug and Zurich ended up winning the whole thing. So you've got a neighbor that's got some stuff figured out. Now, that area is called Crypto Valley. And it's not called Blockchain Valley, although there's a lot of great related blockchain activity as well. But this is very early days. And can you find the leadership to make this change? I'll just mention a couple of things we're doing. April 24th, 25th in Toronto, we have a big conference for the enterprise. It's going to be a big round stage. And I'd encourage you to look at us in the Blockchain Research Institute. We're sort of doing all this stuff. And overall, let me just end by saying that leadership can come from anywhere for this new change. And if I could, I'm just going to take a minute and show you a video that kind of makes the point about distributed trust. We've been studying nature, actually, to learn more about trust and how it works, in addition to organizations. And fish come in schools, bees come in swarms, starlings, different places in the world, the moors of England, for example, come in something called a murmuration. Do you know this word, murmuration? It refers to the murmuring of the wings of the birds. And starlings are out over a 30-kilometer range during the day, foraging for food and so on, and at night they come together and they create one of the most spectacular things in all of nature. And the murmuration has some functions. It warms the birds up for the night ahead. A big one is it protects the birds. On the right of the screen here, you can see a hawk, 25 times the size of a starling, a killer, a predator of starlings being chased away by the collective power of the little birds. Scientists that have studied this say they've never seen an accident, and there's leadership, but there's no one leader. And when the moment is right, this spectacular thing happens. So is this some kind of fanciful analogy, or could we actually learn something about the trust protocol? The murmuration functions according to the principles of the trust protocol. Remember I said trust is not achieved through an intermediary. There's no intermediary. It's achieved through cryptography, and there's DNA that gives rules to the birds. Big one is don't get too far away. Well, another one is don't bump into anybody else. But I said it's achieved through cryptography and code, and also through collaboration. This, in a sense, is a collaboration. It has a great interdependence. You know, one of the principles behind these global institutions based in Geneva is that business can't succeed in a world that's failing, and no country can succeed in a world that's failing over time. And blockchain and this murmuration function according to that principle. An individual bird acts as if its interest is related to the interests of the murmuration as a whole. And finally, there's a great integrity to this thing, in the sense that birds do the right thing. Integrity is the foundation of trust. Like, what is trust, if you think about it? To me, trust is the expectation that the other party will act with integrity. Trust is the expectation that the other party will do the right thing. And an individual little bird will chase a killer 25 times its size because it knows that the other birds will have its back. Imagine if we connected ourselves on this planet through some kind of new network of glass and air and software and cryptography and machines that can learn. What could we do with that? Could we create new models of our institutions? Could we solve some of these intractable problems facing us? Maybe if we do that by the millions and soon billions, this more distributed world that our children inherit might actually be a better one. So thank you very much for inviting me.